All right, hello and welcome everyone. My name is Cristian Hernandez-Blick, Head of Public Programming here at Interspecies Internet. And it's my pleasure to welcome all of you on behalf of the trustees and the organization to another Interspecies Conversations lecture. Interspecies Conversations is a monthly online lecture series where leading thinkers share ideas and research that deepens our understanding of animal communication and cognition, often highlighting related insights into the behavior, conservation, and welfare of non-human species. We aim to platform emerging discoveries and host open discussions where the community can join the conversation with questions and feedback. If you enjoy today's event, please consider donating to Interspecies Internet to help support our programming and other projects and activities. You can find the donation link on our website, interspecies.io, as well as in the video description on our YouTube channel. So we're very excited to be joined today by Dr. Federico Rossano, who will be giving his talk titled, "Can Our Pets Tell Us What They Are Thinking?" Dr. Rossano is an associate professor in the Department of Cognitive Science at the University of California, San Diego. He received his PhD in linguistics from the Max Planck Institute of Psycholinguistics and Radboud University, Netherlands, and has worked as a postdoctoral researcher in the Department of Developmental and Comparative Psychology at the MPI for Evolutionary Anthropology in Leipzig, Germany. His research adopts a comparative perspective on social cognition, cross ages, cross cultures, and cross species, and focuses on the development of communicative abilities and the structure of social interaction in human and non-human animals, such as non-human primates, dogs, and cats. Today, Rossano will discuss the study of domestic cats and dogs who use augmented interspecies communication devices, exploring what this research reveals about animal cognition and their capacity for language-like communication. So as the event description reads, in the 20th century, several scholars believed that training animals to learn and use human language would provide an unprecedented window into their minds and language evolution. In this talk, Dr. Federico Rossano will report on how his team has addressed some of the methodological concerns associated with previous animal language studies in an ongoing study with thousands of dogs and hundreds of cats from 47 countries, trained with an augmented interspecies communication device composed of buttons that, when pressed, reproduce pre-recorded human words and phrases. He will report on findings from longitudinal observational and experimental studies to highlight how dogs and cats are learning to use these devices, to what degree they use them to communicate, and how they combine multiple buttons for more complex meanings. Ultimately, Dr. Rossano will discuss the potential and limitations of this approach for animal cognition and interspecies communication. So, Dr. Rossano, thank you for being with us today. Whenever you're ready, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Let me see if you can see. Can you see my screen? All good? Perfect. Thank you so much for having me. It is a wonderful pleasure to be here. I recognize many people and many names from the audience, and it is really an honor to have a chance to talk to you. As I was telling Diane, I don't know if I found the right balance between trying to show some clips, I promise you I have clips, but also trying to show some plots and figures and some data. So hopefully at the end of it, there will be something that that resonates with you. My preference would be if you could kind of let me tell the story and then ask the questions at the end. But if something is really pressing and you don't, because you're not understanding what I'm saying or you need a clarification, I might not be monitoring the chat while I'm talking, but maybe Christian could just jump in and say, "Hey, there's a clarification question." That would be very helpful. Okay, without further ado, I have a lot of material to share with you. Christian already gave the introduction, but this is my lab. One of the things that you might not know is that when I started my lab in 2016, I put a dog, this is the logo of my lab, in the first letter. And until 2020, I did zero work with dogs because there was no possibility of having a dog lab at UCSD. Actually, there was no dog cognition lab in California whatsoever. So it took a few years to get there, and we now have a center where we conduct behavioral studies on cognitive abilities in dogs at UCSD. And of course, the work that we've been doing with people in the study has been instrumental in making it possible. But what you might also notice is that we also have primates, humans, children, because our lab is comparative in the sense that we study cognition across the lifespan, across cultures, across species, and we're interested in the communicative abilities, how they have evolved and how they change through an individual lifespan, but also how it maps onto sociocognitive abilities that allow us to kind of calibrate what we're going to say and make sense of how others might interpret it. One other important point that I want to highlight is that the lab has been working on observational data, experimental data. We collected data in labs, in zoos, in sanctuaries. Right now, I'm a co-director of a baboon field site in Kenya. I'm actually going to go there very soon. And so we've really tried to apply the concept of ecological validity to its extreme, like trying to compare and understand, how certain environmental factors might affect certain abilities and what can we learn from this. And as you can see here, I've done some work also with wolves and goats and horses and so on and so forth. So we have tried. We're trying, and hopefully there will be something interesting in what we're trying to do also with this talk. There's going to be a little bit of fronting before we talk about the dogs and the cats. And it's mainly trying to get you a sense of how I think about problems, and hopefully we'll also preemptively address some possible concerns. So let me start with something that has nothing to do with dogs, but is very dear to me. The Tabula Peutingeriana. This is the only remaining Roman map in the world. It's protected by UNESCO and is currently located in Vienna in the National Library. It's very hard to find if you go there. I did look for it. But the interesting thing is 1 foot by 21 feet. And it's a road network. Basically, is the equivalent of a map so that you figure out where to go from A to B. Now, when you look at it, you're like, so what is this? And if you actually want to know, this is what it represents. It represents Europe, North America, and the Middle East. You can recognize if you look at over here, this is Italy, horizontally located. This is Sicily. And you can basically see very clearly that it has no resemblance with any current map that we would have in terms of north and south and so on. Yet this has been used and was very effective as a map, as a road map, because you can basically see if you take this road and you keep walking straight, you're going to hit all these cities. So you're going to actually reach all this location. Whether it's vertical or horizontal, it doesn't really matter. And so my take-home message for this is that a tool sometimes can be helpful, even if it is flawed in many other respects. And I want this to be out there because I do not think the buttons are the solution to the interspecies communication, but it's a tool that we could possibly consider, and we can consider what it gives us and what it doesn't give us compared to other tools. Now, when we talk about tools, of course, the other thing that I want to address is the issue that what are augmented interspecies communication devices? And the idea that somehow some people thought that this was some new invention of 2020, and clearly it's not. So these devices are being used with animals at least since the 1970s, and they've been used with non-human primates. They've been used with dolphins. Diana has done work on it too. It had also been used with a dog in 2008. This one down here was used with a dog. There's a paper published in Animal Cognition in 2008 about using this device with a single dog called Sophia. These devices were mutuated and adapted from devices that have been used with nonverbal humans since the 1920s. So again, it's not like, oh, we just invented anything. I didn't invent anything. This was already out there. But also, these devices have been used for a long time, both with nonverbal humans and with animals. And so there are things that we have learned and things that we know about their work. So when you see these buttons, while they might have a slightly different form and be more colorful and so on, the reality is that they are basically sort of an extension of a certain way of trying to figure out how to give a voice to somebody who doesn't have the ability to speak. And that's the important point, because the entire study that you're going to hear about is not about comprehension, it's about production. It's about what are you going to try to say, and can you use some of these devices to reveal what you're currently wanting, thinking, upset about, and so on. Now, not somebody, many people have complained to me that, hey, why are you using this plastic cheap buttons instead of using some fancy new tools? And I'll show you, we also do machine learning and we use fancy tools. But I would like to remind people that when you think about old tools, not all old tools are useless. Like one of my favorite is the hammer that was actually invented 3 million years ago, and we still use it, on a daily basis. Again, just because it's not perfect, it doesn't mean that it's useless, right? And so again, I would like to caution people in just adopting a perspective of like dismissing it just because it looks maybe a little cheap or because it doesn't meet, the new AI sort of excitement mood. The other point that I want to make is that when we think about communication, there's a general misunderstanding that there's a perfect way of communicating that applies to anybody. The reality is that signals, communicative signals, are not optimized to transmit information in absolute terms, but rather in the most accessible way based on the perception and cognitive abilities of the receiver, because the goal is to facilitate comprehension. Let me give you an example. I have a 3-year-old, and when I was telling my 3-year-old that dad has to give a talk on Saturday morning, I did not say, hey, I'm giving a lecture on interspecies communication, but I was like, Dada needs to be in front of a computer and is going to have to talk. So can you please not scream? And that's it. Like whatever I'm doing with this, the way I explain it to him clearly cannot be the same way I would explain to my wife, which if I just said this would be like, what? And so it's like, there's some level in which we need to care about who you're talking to, so that ideally the other one will understand and behave accordingly, which also means the communication relies on an underlying assumption of cooperation. You hope that once they hear the signal, the other one will deal with it accordingly. And that successful communication requires taking into account the recipient, their ability and likelihood of recognizing and responding to the signal, right? So if you think the recipient will not understand anything, there's no point in me telling a turtle I'm doing a talk to interspecies. The turtle would not understand, right? So there's no reason to go that way. And at the same time, what it means is that we cannot study communication without thinking that there's an interaction and there's also a recipient, and that this relationship, while we might think of each other and so on, is potentially relevant, and the contingencies that the recipient might have in place in terms of their likelihood, their attention span, their willingness to cooperate, and so on and so forth, which makes interspecies communication, to me, the most fascinating problem in the world. It's like we can have some kind of understanding or assumptions about people who are others that are member of our own species, but imagine having to represent the cognitive abilities and likelihood to understand and respond and so on of something that is different, fundamentally different from you. And yet we do it every day. I mean, I do work on scent detection with law enforcement, and it's just a fascinating issue of like, how is the dog signaling to the human? How is the handler understanding the signaling? When is there a misunderstanding? How do you kind of train this? And you can of course do it for sport. And then there's natural situations out there, like the ADSA and the honey guides, where we know that now this bird starts producing vocalization that the humans can understand and follow, and they can actually find the honey and cooperate. And of course you can look at even non-humans, and so now you have the grouper and the moray heels that can do cooperative hunting successfully, and that's a relationship that works. So again, if you are interested in communication and you are interested in this idea, and you take this approach of taking the recipient into account as well, interspecies communication is the most fascinating challenge in the world. It has to be, because how do you represent a mind that is so different from yours? Now, as you know, there's been many attempts, and I'll briefly mention some others down the road, but there's one thing that I want to kind of highlight early, which is the way in which we've been keeping track of some of this communication. So some of you, actually probably everybody in this audience knows, that if you ask what is the longest sentence ever produced by a non-human, the answer is Nim Chimpsky, give orange me, give eat orange me, eat orange, give me, eat orange, give me you. And this is used, the 16-word sentence is used and was used by Terrace and others to say, and this is why this is ridiculous, and this animal doesn't understand anything, and this doesn't make any sense. Now, the problem is that if you look at it this way, and you look at it without silence, just one word after the other, you are absolutely right. This doesn't make much sense. But if you imagine, and again, I don't know if that's how it was produced, but if you imagine looking at it this way, give orange me, and then there's no response. And now I try again, give eat, because I want to eat orange me, and then there's no response. And then I try again, it's like, I want to eat an orange, give me, and then there's no response. Eat orange, give me. I repeat the same thing. I tried, maybe you're looking at me now, but you're not responding. And then there's no response. I'm like, you, can you do this to me? Now, when you look at it this way, then maybe it's not a ridiculous sentence, then maybe it's actually several turns, several attempts at trying to get the recipient to do something for you. Maybe not with perfect grammar, clearly, but somehow trying to find a way to get the other one to do something for you. And so the issue is when you look at a sequence without a sense of time, without any sense of like what happens in between, without the recipient, then you're neglecting the fact that communication is meant to be interactional and that someone is supposed to respond to this. It's not just I just send signals into the void. I'm actually trying to get you to do something for me, right? Or at least respond to it. And so the focus should be on the interaction and not just on the individual signals. So we shouldn't just be looking at words. We should be looking at how these words or concepts or signals are used in interaction with others. What are they aimed to elicit, and what is the response that they get? The other thing I wanted to mention is what is the current standard in the field for people who do comparative psychology and primatology in terms of what counts as intentional communication. This is a quote from a paper by Catherine O'Bater and Richard Byrne. I know that Kat has given a talk to this audience and is a friend of many of you. And so the idea is we define intentional communication, the definition is here, broadly as communication deliberately targeted to a particular recipient with the aim of influencing their behavior in a specific way. And there are three main criteria to look for this. One is audience checking. The signaler is monitoring the recipient, is looking at the recipient. Two is response waiting. I produce the signal and I wait for a response. And three is persistence. I try, I fail, I try again, right? So clearly I'm trying to get something from you. It's important because this is a definition that any paper on communication in non-human primates is using. And we've been using this at least for the last 15 years, but in many ways even earlier than that, maybe more, less sort of strictly. And I want you to keep this in mind when you see the clips that I'm going to show you, because again, there have been people saying there is no evidence that these animals are using this device to communicate or even to try and get anything from the human. And I want you to sort of consider some of this once you look at the data. And by the way, it's not that we just woke up thinking about this. I've been part of this paper looking at suggesting that maybe we should move beyond single-mindedness and trying to put interaction at the center of cognitive science instead of looking at the individual mind as the center of what we're trying to investigate. So if you're interested, this is a kind of a short paper suggesting that maybe we should take a more interactional approach to cognitive science and understand that that's the exciting challenge. Now, to give you another instance of why it is important, this is work that I'm doing with Jekter Williger, a graduate student in my lab, on how children learn language. And so I want to present you with this fascinating problem. So when you look at language acquisition in children, we think that's a solved problem. The reality is it's not. We think it's a solved problem because we're very good at predicting when children will learn nouns. We are okay at predicting when children will learn verbs. But there's a bunch of stuff that we don't quite know how to predict. This, by the way, was the best paper in cognitive science in 2019, and we replicated it by Brzezinski and others. So if you look at this plot, the idea is if you're close to this line, then you are pretty good at predicting age of production. So when the child is going to produce that word based on certain features of the word. But you might notice that there's a bunch of words here that clearly don't fit. Basically, they are produced way earlier than the model would actually suggest. The ones that we are interested in are these words, things like hi, bye, thank you, yes, no, hello, good night, yum yum, more. And the interesting thing is that they're produced on average 4 months earlier than the model predicts. And 4 months when you're 15 months old, it's a lot of time earlier. Okay. There is a fundamental gap in word learning theory that is non-considering things that we can call social routine words, the things that we use to coordinate with others, to do things with others, because they're considered non-referential and according to some abstract, although we can debate whether that's true. But I want to point out something else. Look at this figure here and look at these two words on the left. Now, these two are clearly completely off. And if I ask you, what are these two words? If you are a parent, you know exactly what those two words are. Those two words are mom and dad. And mom and dad are produced way earlier than any other word that you would imagine. And we're very bad at predicting why. And it's again because we forget that for a human being, for a creature, what matters is not just, name of objects in the world or actions, but what matters is how can I coordinate with you and the people who are close to me, a relationship, mom and dad, okay? So if you actually look at what are the first 10 words that a child produces, this is pretty much consistent across several languages, is mom and dad, ball, I don't know why ball, but let's say ball, bye, oh, hi, no, dog, baby, and woof woof. Okay. And again, I want you to tell me how many verbs you see in here. So when you're obsessed about actions and telling them what to do, or how many objects you see in here. There's agents, there's people, there's animals, and there's coordination, social routine work. Okay. So again, keep this in mind because when we think about what we expect the dog to do and what we think about humans do, maybe that matters. Okay. So what have we done with dogs before we started working on this? Well, if you ask at how people were trying to measure word learning in dogs, there's a famous paper by Pongratz et al. In 2001 suggesting that the average dog knows about 29 words. It was basically asking the owners, how many words do you think your dog knows? And they make a list. In 2022, Reeve and Jacques, Canadian researchers, asked kind of the same question I use in the MacArthur-Bates tools that basically are used with human children. And now the number is very different. It's like 89 words. And that's the average dog. But as you can see, the range is huge. It goes from some owners thinking my dog only knows 15 words, and others thinking it knows 215 words. Again, you're asking the owner which word do you think your dog understands, which doesn't necessarily mean that that's perfectly correct, but that's sort of the same way we do it with children. So in that sense, those estimations are comparable. Now, the interesting finding here is that if you look at dogs, it seems to be that herding dogs and toy companion dogs like terriers and so on, and herding dogs like border collies or shepherds and so on, they seem to be better at word learning than other breed. Indeed, especially better than mutts and many other breed out here. And I want you to keep this in mind because you're going to hear from me later what happens to our data set. But what is it that we know? We know, for example, that in the 1920s, there was a famous German Shepherd called Fellow. Then you was shown to know at least 68 words. It was in several movies. And the method used was pretty much the same that was then used with Rico, only in a kind of smaller, in fewer objects in the environment. Rico was a border collie that in 2004 was shown to know more than 200 words. Bailey, a terrier that was shown to know 117 words. Chaser, another border collie that was shown to know 1,022 words. But what I want you to consider again is that when we're talking about words, we're not talking about hi, bye, and so on. In this case, when we say this number of words, we're talking about name of objects that you can go retrieve and bring back. Okay, so again, we're talking about name of specific artificial things that you are able to bring back. Indeed, Fugata and others have shown recently that the ability to learn names of objects is actually quite a rare skill for dogs. And you might know about the gifted dog challenge, where basically they tested several dozen dogs and they found that only about 7 were actually capable of learning words pretty quickly, name of objects. Dogs can learn name of actions, learning name of words, name of objects, sorry, is much harder, okay? So this is the context before I go in and start doing my thing. And I hopefully that gives you a little background for where we are at and now I come into it. So now fast forward, or actually go back to 2019. And in 2019, there's a speech language pathologist called Christina Hanger that starts trying to use the same devices she was using with her clients with her dog Stella. Okay. And she goes viral and she's on CNN and she goes viral and there's a few people that are like, wow, this could be really interesting. You're now trying to teach this dog to use buttons to communicate. And initially, people reach out to me and say, hey, do you want to do it? And I'm like, no, there's a long history of the animal language studies. And I think we should be very careful about this. And I definitely don't want to get involved in this. Then 2020, my daughter is born. And once you become a dad, something changes. All of a sudden, you are dealing every day with someone who's not speaking and is learning how to speak and is slowly making progress. Now I have two kids, a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old. And while I'm holding this child, COVID starts. And so now there's no research that you can do anywhere. I cannot test children, cannot test primates, cannot do anything. And so I spent a lot of time with my daughter, paying attention to my child. And at some point, I get a text message from Leo Troutier, who was in the audience and is the CEO of Fluent Pet. And he is also an alumni of cognitive science. We have known each other for a while. And he's basically asking me, hey, what do you think of this, of what Christina Hanger was doing? And I'm like, yeah, that's great, but I don't know what to make of it. And it's like, what do you think of this other dog? And he starts sending me clips of this dog. I'm not on Instagram, I'm not on TikTok. I have no idea who this dog is, but for those of you who are, you might recognize this is Bunny, the talking dog, that now has, I believe, 9 million followers or something like that. At that point is Puppy Bunny. Okay, so I'm seeing clips of Puppy Bunny, and I'm like, wow, this is impressive. But I'm also like, but it's still two dogs, But what Leo tells me at that point, which changes everything for me, was, hey, we are starting to sell some of these buttons, and we have several hundred people who would like to do the training, and they might be interested in being part of a study if we were to do anything. And now, again, if you are a scientist, you can get any data, and somebody tells you, hey, there might be 100 people possibly willing to participate in something that, is difficult. You're like, well, should we try? Now, I'm used to doing studies, in the field or in the lab with very small numbers. If you do comparative psychology, often you have like 5, 10 subjects, 20 subjects. So the idea of having 100 seems like way too ambitious. Also, it was a time which you couldn't go anywhere. So we have to figure out how can we do a citizen science wise. And there's a lot of problem with citizen science. How can you trust the data? How are you going to do it? How you coordinate? And so we started literally on Friday evening, 6 to 7. It was me, Leo, and a couple of other people. And it was Kelly and Jack. And we start trying to figure out how we even going to do this. In the meanwhile, we get people start picking up. And so we start enrolling people and we start getting amazing students wanting to join us. So we have some internships, and so some students come for 2 or 3 months. Some people stay a little longer and keep on working. And so, the work that was done was possible because many people helped along the way. And I want to acknowledge all this help. I wish more people would help in the future. We need a lot of help. You'll see why. But it's just like, this is only possible because this thing happened during COVID and people wanted to connect. And they wanted to have a chance to sort of connect with who was close to them. And of course, for many people, it was, their pets. So what is it that I saw? These are not exactly the clips that Leo sent me, but these are 2 clips from Bunny that I would like to show you to give you a sense of what I find interesting. And I'll tell you why they're interesting. So the first clip is Bunny asking Alexis, the owner, when is Dad coming back? And Dad is supposed to take Bunny out to pee or go for a walk. And I want you to notice how Bunny's using the buttons, but the owner is just talking back. So it's not pushing buttons back. So there's some kind of back and forth. So please watch this clip and let me know if you can't hear it.
We'll walk a little bit later. We settle now. Dad went by. Dad went to pick up a pike pole. Dad home soon. Okay, what help? What help, baby?
So again, this is not a paper, this is just like the kind of things I saw in the beginning. And I was like, maybe we should study this, okay? So you see this dog, there's some kind of back and forth with a human. The back and forth seems to be potentially reasonable, given what was said. And mainly the dog is asking a question in first position, is saying, when is dad coming back? Which again is like, wait, is Bunny thinking about someone who's not present in the room? If that's true, that would be displacement, which is a cognitive ability that, according to some, only humans have. And it's also asking for help, right? It's asking, can you help me? I need something. Also, I hope you notice that Bunny looks at the owner and waits. So there's some sense of like, I'm continuing. So now watch this second example. This one is Bunny asking for the cat.
Cat, dog, want? You want the cat that's up there? Where's the cat? Yup. You want the cat?
Cat, dog, want. Cat, hi, want. Now, I know that Alexis is a native speaker of English, and I know that she has not trained the sentence cat, dog, want. That's not a sequence that she would have trained. And then we can also check on the kind of training that she gives. And it's important because we know that there's actually several dogs that do sequences that are not quite following the subject, verb, object structure that you would imagine. If you remember Nim Chimpsky, you might have noticed that Nim was not using that sequence either. And it's important because if that is the case, then potentially they can start putting things together and ask for things in situations that are unlikely. I don't think that this cat dog want happen every day in that household. I don't think it's like, oh, do you want the cat? Why would, as a human, ask a dog if you want the cat that is up high? It's probably some very unique situation that you're kind of responding to, and you're like, the dog reacts to it. And you see later why this matters to me. Now, there's one more thing that I want to show you from Bunny, and then I'm going to show you a bunch of clips from other dogs and tell you exactly what kind of analysis we're doing. We're not collecting clips and writing papers on it. We're actually collecting millions and millions of data points, running experiments. But I want to give you this to give you a sense of sort of what are the things that inspire us and think maybe we should look at it. So this is a clip that got a lot of attention because it's Bunny basically saying that she's in pain and realizing what it is that is a problem.
Why are you mad? Why mad? Where is your ouch? Where ouch? In your ear? Where, stranger? In your paw? Let me see your paw. Okay, I'm gonna put this down. This was this stranger in her paw. She's got a mat between her toes, and that's stuck in it. Now I'm gonna have to figure out how to remove the mat between her toes.
Now you see this and you're like, okay, was this real? I mean, there's clearly some cuts and so on. But what I have seen in the other data that we get from other dogs would be a dog saying belly ouch and then 10 minutes later puking on the floor, or saying ear ouch and then they have an ear infection. And even if at the end of this project we learn absolutely nothing about language and how they put words together, if there's any way in which the dog can let you know that they're not well, that they are sick, they are in pain, and you might do something about it, I think it might not be the worst use of your time trying to get something that where they can tell you how they're feeling. Okay. Again, I'm fronting this because people have said that what I'm doing is unethical. And first of all, I'm not paying anybody to train with buttons. I'm not doing any of this. But I also feel a little kind of upset when people say I'm doing something unethical for the animals. When I'm like, first of all, I'm not. People are doing it no matter what whether I study or not. But it's also like I don't think it is unethical to begin with. I actually think for many people it feels they can understand them better, provide for them, like give them. They ask for food, they ask for things, and they ask to go outside, pee and potty. And for some of them is letting us know that they are not well, and that could be also good. So luckily or unluckily, we got a lot of attention, and we got a lot of this attention before we published studies, which led to, on one end, people signing up, and on the other end, some people getting really upset because we were getting way too much attention. Luckily for us, we have several thousand dogs and several hundreds of cats sign up from 47 countries. You can see, from so many amazing places. And personally, I wish we had even more than 10,000. I wish that we had 100,000, because the reality is that what we're looking for is, the flying pig. Is the one dog that can do something. Is the Rico, the chaser, the fellow, the kind of dog that can show you that maybe they have abilities we didn't know were possible, and trying to figure out what it tells us about their mind and what they can achieve. I like to think is like you're looking for the one who, like if you look at the average human, their mathematical abilities might not be amazing, but some can build rockets and get us to the moon, right? So it's like looking for that kind of talent that can change our understanding of what it means to be a dog or a cat. So these participants can use any kind of device. Now, some of them use Fluent Pet, but many use other devices that they can buy online, on Amazon and so on. As you can see, there's very different types. Some use mats that are organized in terms of concepts, like, there's a name of people, these are actions, these are locations. Some have it on the wall and they might use their nose to push it. Others might use a paw. Some just line them up on a plywood, and that's sort of like how you structure it. So people ask me, why didn't you tell them how to do it? And I was like, well, I don't know what is the best way, right? It's like I have no idea what is the best way to organize this. I've never done it before. Nobody has done this before. So how about we just let people do what they want to do, and then we see what works. And if it works, then hopefully we can do some training using those same constructs. Sorry, this is my son. I don't know if you hear him, but he's just singing outside my door here. So sorry about that. So why are we interested in button trained pets? So potential scientific insights, of course, can they learn about communication? How do they understand the world? How do they experience the world? Can we use it to improve their welfare? To put it simply, can we use this as a window into their minds? Can they help us reveal something they're thinking about, especially because they seem to be using a lot of this in first position? And is it good for them or is it bad for them? And we need to know, right? If nobody studies it, we will never know. So we need to look into this. Now, when I started it, a lot of people told me don't do it. And the people who told me not to do it were people who were very familiar with the history of the animal language studies, which you know better than me. And the issue of, signing apes, to what degree they couldn't, the small sample sizes, the controversial science. And, many of you are familiar with the paper by Herbert Terence in 1979 in Science that almost unilaterally destroys the field and makes a very clear claim that all that NIM could do is just imitating signals to obtain rewards. It's just using humans as vending machines, basically. Does not combine these words creatively, and most importantly, it does not initiate communication. I want to highlight this bit because that's very different from what we're looking at. My own mentor, Michael Tomasello, had just published a paper saying, what did we learn from the ape language studies? And the answer was not very much. And that was a little concerning for me, right? It's like when your mentor says we haven't learned a lot, it's like, should you do it to begin with? Should you even try to get into this? And one of the idea was that what seemed to be missing was this sense of recipient design, of calibration. And one of the claim was, oh, it's because they're apes. And as apes, they don't assume that the other one is going to be cooperative. So we shouldn't even really try with apes. But these are dogs. And what happened since in the last 25 years is that we now know that dogs are better understanding human signals. They're much better understanding words. They understand facial expression. They're much better understanding pointing gestures and so on. They are cooperative with us and they expect us to be cooperative with them. We are interdependent. And so, maybe it's not a terrible idea to try to look at dogs as a possible species to kind of see if they can learn and they can be trained. If they can learn, they can do it. So how do we do it? If we want to avoid some of the issues of previous work, well, one of the big challenges was the issue of overinterpretation, the so-called clever Hans effect. And the idea that a human is putting a lot of they make sense of things. Maybe there's cues that we're not detecting. And so one of the idea was we need to use some chronic video recordings. And in some of these households, we have cameras running 24/7 so that we can see, what's happening. Bunny was the first one we were filming for a long, long time. We have thousands of hours of Bunny and a few other dogs that we're trying to collect longitudinal data on. We wanted to avoid extensive training and culturation in the sense that we didn't want to get a wild animal brought into somebody's home. But of course, and we didn't want to have this animal trained 8 hours, 10 hours a day, as was the case with some of these primates. And so we wanted this to be kind of not too intense on the animal and to have some kind of occasional training. Of course, bringing animals from the wild into a human home or into the lab is a very unnatural setting that has low ecological validity. And while some people might disagree, I would say, at least in the Western world, home is a more ecological setting for a pet than it would be for a chimp. Okay, so in that sense, maybe it's not quite as traumatic. When you only have one bonobo or one chimp or one orangutan, then you are completely dependent on how smart that one is. And if you dedicate your life trying to get them to go somewhere, then that's the one you have. But if you have a large N, so if you have actually thousands, you can possibly capture outliers and maybe realize that it's not just one dog that can do this. Maybe there's 50, maybe there's 100, maybe there's 1,000. And if you also have low N, you have no information on variability. You cannot tell, is it because of the breed? Is it because of the amount of training they got? Is it because of, the responsiveness of their partner? Is it because they live in a household alone with one human, or they live in a household with children and with several other pets? Like, does any of these factors matter in how they learn and how they communicate? And if you have a large N, now you can start capturing individual differences, and that potentially could be meaningful for like predicting and training, right? And deciding this is what you could do and this is what you could not do. And of course, we didn't want to use endangered species, and of course, domesticated animals are not endangered. Indeed, I believe the current estimate is that in the US, there's close to 150 million pets. So about almost like 1 in every 2 people. So, they're not endangered, at least in that sense. I think we can agree. Now, people think, you want to do a pure linguistic analysis. Of course, you cannot do phonetics, but you could possibly look at what is the representations of the concept they're using. You can see how they put it together. You can see the kind of pragmatic use they might make. But to me, some of the things that are more interesting from a cognitive point of view is how do they learn it? And, do they have productivity? I'll show you an example. Do they do displacement? How do they categorize things? So do they have a sense of certain sense of objects, certain places, and so on? Do they represent events similarly to how we know, for example, non-human primates do? What about episodic memory? The claim is only humans have episodic memory, so they remember when, who, where, and what happened, because we have language. And I believe that some of these dogs have the same abilities, just that we need to find a way to reveal that. And if you could ask them questions, that could be helpful. And of course, what about turn taking? We know a lot about turn taking in humans, now a lot about turn taking in primates. What about turn taking? How do they process information, and how do they make sense of what they hear? So let me give you just a couple of quick examples before we look more at numbers. But This is an example from a dog called Parker. This Parker is looking outside and there's an ambulance outside. And this is the soundboard that Parker has at that point. Now Parker has many more buttons right now. You will see the owner will just come sit down and start looking at, I think, at an iPad or a book. And the question is, what's happening next? You're going to see Parker going to the soundboard, is going to push two buttons, squeaker, car, and then it's going to go to the owner and look at the owner. And again, if you think about intentional communication, you use two buttons, you look at the owner and wait for a response, okay? Sorry, the audio is really bad, but I promise you, you can hear a squeaker car.
That is a speaker. Yes, speaker car. What speaker car window?
So this is, by the way, similar to a study that was done with children, where it's like if a child points about something excitedly and you don't turn and look at it and convey the same excitement, then the child will keep waiting for a response that is aligned with what you are trying to communicate. Now, we don't know for sure that Parker was trying to communicate about the ambulance, but it creates again the possibility or the need for a study, right? We need to run a study on this, on productivity. Now, if it was the only instance I have, I'd be like, okay, that's it. But I've seen dogs pushing bone water and then the owner realizes it might be asking for ice. And once they are given ice and they're given the button ice, they stop pushing bone water as a combination. I help to ask for a medicine that is given to them for the ice. This is the type, it's not candy stranger, it's treat stranger that I came to find out is basically referring to my experimenters going to test. Apparently they were giving way too many treats to the dog. And so after they would leave, they would ask the owner, where is the treat stranger? And basically they were asking about where are the experimenters? So again, there seems to be possible ways in which they might combine words to communicate about something that they don't have a word for. And according to what we know, only humans can do this. But as of March 2025, we have at least 526 dogs and 126 cats that produce multi-button combination, and from whom we have more than 200 presses. Now, we know that Kanzi could do this, that one bonobo, but we also know that unfortunately Kanzi passed away. And so if we want to know if productivity is possible, I believe this is our best shot right now. It's like we have hundreds of dogs and 126 cats. We can try and look at some of them and see if maybe some of them can do it. And we need to run experiments on this, and that's what we want to do. Now, another thing that I'm interested in, as I said, is displacement, right? And so when you look at displacement, you want to see, can they refer to things that they cannot see? And so I want you to see this clip, which I think is actually pretty funny. This is copper.
You want outside? Okay. The pool is drained right now, but I guess I could fill it up again. Okay, pool outside later. Pool outside later. Okay, pool later.
So again, you are on one hand communicating about something that is not in your current view, and you heard others asking about, they often ask about who's not present, some human that is not present. And you can do some now later and realize that later means it's not going to happen, and now can be a way of insisting. And again, we'll see that sometimes they combine now with other concepts so that they convey some sense of urgency. The last example I want to show you before we look at how we do it is an example in which the dog is still learning buttons and is using the button wrongly, but the owner can tell that that's not what the dog wants. So what you're going to see is Dapper is going to try to throw a ball to kind of initiate play. And instead of pushing ball, is pushing the button massage. So see what happens. Zappa is the name of the dog.
What about it, Zappa? What do you want me to do?
What do you want me to do?
Zappa massage. That's not the right one. Look, Zappa massage is like this. Yeah? No. Here's that. Yeah. Come here. Zappa massage. Come here. Zappa massage. Zappa massage. It's not what you want, is it? Okay. Aha, good boy. That's the right one. Good boy.
Ball. Again, part of the idea is how are they learning this? If you don't have videos, you just don't know, right? It's like some of it is you might, in this case, first you say the name, their own name, and then they say what they want. I'll show you other examples. Asking for massages or scratches, they do it very often. That is actually something I find very cute. But it sort of gives you a sense of some of the things that happen, also why we need videos and why we need more videos, because it's hard to figure out just from the sequence of buttons, like what's happening in between, how did they potentially learn about it. So what we try to do is we try to have 4 phases. I don't know why the third one looks so bad right now, but basically phase 1, we use surveys. We have an intake questionnaire of 180 questions. We're using an app in collaboration with FromPet that logs data. And we also use some focus groups where we ask people specific questions about what's going on. And I'll tell you more about it. Phase 2, 24/7 longitudinal continuous videos. Phase 3, controlled experiments. And phase 4 is a training study we started a few months ago, and I'll tell you a bit more about it. So as I said, we have more than 10,000 intake forms with 180 questions, including information about the household, what kind of words do they know, what kind of training they got, what kind of medications they might be taking. And then when they log, initially they were manually logging the button they were pressed. Now with some other devices, you can actually have, with Connect, for example, they're timestamped automatically, so you don't need to actually worry about them remembering to push it, to type it. We ask them to include information about anything changing in the house and so on. We are trying to introduce smart collars with some of them to get a sense of like, do they push it when they're aroused? Do they push it after they calm down? Like, is there some kind of association with kind of arousal state and how they use these buttons? When you think about the recordings, we try in different ways. As you can imagine, it's not easy to put cameras in someone's home and let them run. But we have recordings from a few dogs. We have some more that we're collecting. And some people shared the videos that they're collecting. They have running cameras that kind of like Ring cameras that then they allow us to look at. And of course, now if you have automatic logging, you have timestamps, but if you don't, then we need to go and find out, was there a dog there? Was there a cat there? And do we hear a word? Because you don't want to have students watching 24/7 videos. You know, you can only imagine how much data it is. You can only imagine the cost of storing this thing, which is another big issue for us, because the reason we cannot collect more data is because I've just been told just to get a few more terabytes, I need to spend $25,000. And I'm like, I don't have it. So, you know, part of the limitation sometimes is just like, can we get some space where we can actually put this stuff? And when you have videos, we have videos with several cameras. This is Bastian's house. We have several days, I believe a few weeks from Bastian. This is, for example, Scarlet and Spirit. You can see, you know, you try to capture basically the soundboards and you try to capture the household so that you can possibly see the humans in there and get a better sense of what's happening. And what is exciting about this, by the way, Scarlet and Spirit, is that I believe Scarlet is the older dog, but then the owner, Diane, got a younger dog, Spirit. And so she started filming when she started training the new dog. And if you know about Kanzi, Kanzi was not trained directly, but learned by watching his mom being trained, at least in the beginning. And so we're interested in, like, if you have a dog that already is using buttons and now you introduce the new one, how's the new one? Is the new one going to learn faster, or is the new one just going to need a completely different set of things? So we're trying to look into these things. And of course, it takes time. And then we have pre-registered studies. Every single paper we publish is pre-registered. And I want to be clear about this. We do not just do it and then play around with it. We conducted experiments, a few experiments, and we had several people who wanted to participate by Zoom, video instructions, in-person testing. And as I said, recently we started a training study because, of course, once you learn something about it, you want to know what if I tell you what to train, and how quickly can you train, and can all of them learn it, or can they not learn it? And what about once you have introduced new words, do they start combining them with anything else, or do they just not do that? So we are in the middle of this. I can't quite tell you how far we're going, but I can tell you it is very helpful to do a training study. Again, we can't have 10,000 people doing it, but it's exciting. And as you can tell, this is like just 25 participants. We have more than 60 right now in the study. But it gives us, you have cameras and you get a sense of how some of this thing is working. So very briefly, some of the things we learned. Well, the first thing is that there's huge individual differences in terms of how many buttons they have. Now, this is more about the owner than about the dog. I'll show you how many buttons they use, because you can have 180 buttons, but because you have a lot of money and a lot of space, or you might only have 4 because you don't want to bother to buy more. Doesn't mean that the dog cannot learn more than that. But it's important because, as you can tell, many of these dogs have few buttons, and indeed the median is 9. And for the cats, the median is 7. This thing obviously changes over time. You asked me to give a talk 1 year from now, that number could be different. But right now, that's sort of where we're at. Whereas like a lot of these dogs have only a few buttons, and cats, and others have a ton. And indeed, if you look at how many buttons is the dog using by age, this is our best dogs. What you can see is, for example, that we have a 4-year-old that is using more than 90 buttons. And this is just in the last 3 months. These are different buttons that they're using in the last 3 months. But you can also see some old dogs like 9, 10, 11, they're using more than 20 buttons, which it's interesting to me, right? It's like these dogs cannot have started training when they were puppies. Obviously, they started training much later. They might have started even recently, and they can still learn 20, 30 buttons and use them. One of my favorite was a cat called Billy the cat. It died last year, but by the time it died, I believe it had 70 buttons, and it was using at least 50 buttons quite regularly. We had a blind cat that was using several buttons. And again, it's just like, you look at this and you're like, well, clearly there's huge individual differences, and we want to know what can we learn from that. Now, when you look at the most engaged with buttons, what it means is the dogs that press the most buttons themselves, okay? You find out of the top 30, these are the breed: Australian Shepherds, mixes of Terriers, mixes of Poodles, Spaniels, Belgian Malinois, Belgian Shepherd, Bichon Frise, Moody, American Bully, Cavapaw, Dalmatian, a Mat Dominant Doberman, a Mat Dominant Moody, one Border Collie. And again, I want you to see this because you remember the previous claim where it was like you need to be a herder, a herding dog or a toy companion to be good at this. Well, poodles are, interesting here, but there's a lot of variation, a lot of amazing dogs. So one of the questions, what do they do when you are distracted, right? So if you actually, the dog pushes the button and you're not paying attention, what do they do next? And in this case, most of them just repeat the button presses, and others press the same button several times, right? And some of them bark, which again makes perfect sense. And some of them look at the teacher and the instructor, like, hey, the human, which is helpful. I want to show you one example of how this dog is using these buttons. You're going to hear the dog barking, and then it's going to use the soundboard. And this is a transcript, basically. The dog is barking, and it's going to say potty, and the human says no, because they just went potty. And I've been told later that what happened was that there's a neighbor dog outside, was just outside and was kind of hanging out, and the dog heard him and probably wanted to go out. So this is the clip. You hear the barking? Clearly the dog is barking.
Potty.
And the human says no. So he comes back again.
Let's go to the park.
And the human doesn't respond to this. Let's go to the park. It's like, what? This is Samson, by the way. This is the dog. So you're going to hear him bark again. Sorry, it's a little long, but you're going to hear it bark again. The dog still wants to go outside.
Come outside.
Oh, come outside.
Oh, and then it goes outside. Okay, so what is interesting here is what is this relation between barking and pushing buttons, right? So you can consider barking as a way of calling for attention. So do you say the same way where I would say, Christian, and then I tell you something? Or I'm just trying to tell you barking, but you don't get me. So now I use the buttons as a backup of like, maybe this will help you figure this out. We don't really know because, of course, unless we have the camera in, we don't know, which comes first and how they use it. And if you just have button presses, the barking is not there, right? And so we don't know what else was being said and whether anything was done. And I don't hear the no, right? The fact that the human might be just talking is exciting, but also a problem because we don't have that. So what are they doing when they push these buttons? Well, luckily for us, this was a test. Most of them say they're asking for things, they're requesting things, and that's what we want. If they told us most of the things they do is sharing emotions, I would have been like, that is unlikely. That's what they do most of the time. Most of the time is they just want to go outside, they want food and so on, and I'll tell you what exactly they ask. Some of them inform or alert, that's what a dog does. It tells you there's somebody outside. One of the favorite combination that they press is stranger outside, which is usually the Amazon delivery guy that comes at your door, the food delivery guy that just comes at your door and waits outside, puts stuff in, takes picture, and the dog is like, there's a stranger outside. And they tell you that it's going on. Fun fact, a cat got an award from the firefighters because they alerted that there was somebody that was trying to break into the house, and actually they called the police and so on. And so this actually helped the customer, whatever, the human, alert the police and so on. They called 911. And another one alerted about smoke. I didn't have a smoke detector, alerted there was smoke, and actually the firefighters came, and indeed there was smoke in the house, and so they evacuated. It was an apartment complex. And again, it's like, for most of them, it might be nothing, but maybe for one person, it could be the difference between being safe or not being safe. And I'm like, I don't see why this is a huge problem. Some of them seem to be telling you something about how they feel, being frustrated or concerned or mad, as you saw some. And I'll show you, if you have questions, I have some clips about they speak for others or speak to another pet. I did not believe it to begin with. I thought it was very weird and sketchy. And then I've seen some things, and I can tell you later. If you have questions, you can ask me. By the way, narrating, describing what you see, is what a child does while they're learning language. So it would be something like mom cooking, dad watching TV, or, and that kind of stuff is like, you're not asking for that, you're not alerting, it's not a dangerous situation, you're just describing what you see. And we see children do it, and of course, and we see some of these dogs do it. So our button press is random or accidental. This paper was published, and we'll tell you some of the follow-ups. So these are some of the buttons that they press. And we wanted to know, do they press them equally, or do they have some concept they press more often than not? And if you look at it, outside, treat, food, play, party, walk, toy, water, now, want, are pressed more frequently than not. And things like settle, no, happy, question mark, and so on, is not quite equally pressed. I love you also is not above chance. So while you might train it, it doesn't mean that they actually will use it. Okay, so that was helpful for us. This is an example I want to show you. I keep showing you this clip just to say it's not like, this is obviously not on social media. This is somebody who sent us a clip from their home. This is a dog. I want you to see the owner is completely distracted doing something else, and the dog is gonna call saying mom, scratches.
Mom. Yes. Scratches.
And then looks at the owner. And again, to show you that they initiate, right? So that's what you see in most of our interactions. The dog asks for stuff, and sometimes it's cuddling, scratching, food, or going outside. Sometimes they do something else.
Mom,
So are this combination, when they do multi-button combination, are they random? We conducted analysis, we can talk more in the discussion. It's a random index. Basically, the gray plot is what it would be given the buttons. It gives you a score by individual. This is how it should line up if it was completely random. If the number is close to here is or above is basically random. Below that is less random. This is clearly non-random. And so what we can see is that at least for some dogs, this multi-button combination are not random. They're not just spamming the soundboard. There seem to be some specific thing they're doing. Some of them are random, and I want to be very clear about this. This is, for some of this, it is completely random. You can look at one individual and you can look, for example, like when you have some buttons that get pressed with others in certain combinations, what are they? So for this one is Bastian, and you see like want, now, and walk get used with several other buttons. So I want food, I want outside, I want treat. But that's why you can't just do data science, but you need to kind of get a sense of the people. If you talk to the owner, they will tell you that that's how they train want. They train want with several different concepts, so that's how Bastian learned want. Want outside, want treat, want this, want that. So if you train it as such, it's not surprising that then you use in combinations with others, which is totally fine. It's very interesting to know. But if now was not introduced in combination with others, but you learn that now means urgent or like I don't want to wait, and you start using in combination with other concepts, well, now you're actually using as also a way of emphasizing, and that can be interesting, right? It's like, can you now combine two signals, but you are starting to combine and choose what to combine it with rather than you were trained to combine it in that way, right? We run Bayesian modeling, and again, you can look at the paper, what we've done, and you can try to find some of this concept, and you find things like food and play, or like help and the name of the dog, like they're asking for help, right? And so they might use some of these combinations, and they're above chance, and that's kind of interesting for us. But of course, there's an issue where, like, you know, some buttons might be very close to each other, so that's why you might find that some of them get touched a lot close to each other. And so then there's an issue that the human might be putting it close to each other because you use them a lot. So how do we control for, is it that the human put it there, or is it because those are things that you want to push? We try to move beyond like manual login. So these are automated login. Now this is cats. You've never seen this. This is not published. So you're the first to see this. And I want you to see what are the favorite concepts for cats. Treat, food, scritches, totally fine. Settle, where the cat tells the human to settle, to calm down, basically. No, that's one of the favorite concepts for cats. Play, want, cuddle, on name, toy, help, brush. But I love the fact that they have no as one of their favorite word, while no is almost never used by the dog. It's just a very rare concept for the dog. Once you look at cats, you can see, again, a similar distribution, right? So some of them are completely random, some of them are not. This is 126 cats, which it's not saying they are doing something amazing. It just says we need to look more closely at who are these cats? What are they doing? Can we talk to the owners? Can we record them? Can we see videos and so on? We've done it now with 526 new dogs, a new data set. We have 4.5 million button presses we are using to generate this plot. So now it's not the 150, it's like way more data, completely new dogs, automated login and so on, similar distribution. And you're like, okay, so you got it. They're clearly doing amazing things. But you see how strong this score is, how high it is on this end, which suggests it's really non-random? Well, we have reason to believe that at least some of them, actually those are human presses that are logged as dog presses. And of course, once you have 4 million button presses, some of these things might actually be a problem. So I want to convey that I am skeptical to begin with. I need to be skeptical. I'm not trying to say they can do amazing things, but we're looking into it. And so we run Markov chain analysis, and we try to run Bayesian models again. And again, we can talk more about what we're trying to do. We also run experiments. Just want to show you this clip. This is a paper that got published last year. An experimenter goes into a room, you see some stickers on some buttons, so the experimenter doesn't know which buttons are getting pressed. They were put by another experimenter before. She has headphones on, and in this case, she pushes the button play. and then stands up, and the dog goes to the toy basket, retrieves the ball, and comes back. And again, the concept is play, is not ball. And we also have outside, and we have food. And so we pre-registered this, we coded for a bunch of behaviors, and wanted to say, does it look like they are responding in a way that is consistent with the signal that with the button that is pressed. We also have the owners say the same word and see how they respond, and we find that they respond the same way. And again, the results are not perfect, but they are interesting, right? So they clearly understand play and outside. Food, they do more food-related behavior than in the other conditions, but they also have behaviors that could be related to being excited or being playful and so on. And again, we can discuss why that is. But ultimately, you can start running experiments in people's houses. We have 60 dogs that were tested for this. And you can run this other experiment. And this is unpublished too, so please pay attention to this. We run the impossible task. The impossible task is you have a Tupperware initially, and there's a treat inside. Initially, the dog can get access to it. And so they just go for it, and they don't need any help. Normally, when you do it with animals, what you're interested in is, does the animal try to get the human to assist, okay? So I want to show you one clip. This is Parker, and we instruct the owner to just look at the wall and not react. And so see what Parker does. So it's a little bit of a longer clip, but it's unedited. I want to show, I'm not giving you edited clips. This is like what it is. So Parker tries to open the Tupperware, realizing cannot open it. And then what Parker is going to do is he's going to go to the owner and try to get the owner to help. Looks at the owner, tries to call the owner. The owner is not responding. I know it's very awkward, but that's part of the experiment. Then the dog goes back to the Tupperware. And the question is, look how many buttons Parker has. Which is Parker going to use the button? And what is Parker going to push? And Parker pushes help, look, look. Again, do all dogs do this? No. Most of them don't do much. They just try to get the owner their own way. They don't use the buttons. But this dog can choose out of all those buttons, help, look, look, which is a way of calling for the attention of the owner, and can do this repeatedly, right, on different trials and different conditions and so on. Which to me says that at least for maybe one dog in the world, maybe more, there seems to be some ability to process the situation and trying to call for the attention and tell them what you need. So as I said, we're doing a training study. I don't have results. I just want to show you beautiful people doing beautiful things in people's homes, just to say there's a lot of stuff that we're trying to collect. This is just a fraction of the people we're collecting data with. So what else we're looking at, and this is really the end of the talk, well, we're interested in learning, right? So how do they learn it? Because we know that there are buttons that the teacher pushes a bunch of time and the dog pushes way more time than it is otherwise. And we know that for some dogs, the human needs to press the button a ton of times. The blue is the human pressing until the dog starts touching it, right? So you see a lot of blue before you see the red. But for some other dogs, you see a lot of red already early on, and then the human pushes it too, and suggests that like they might try and check what's happening and then go with it. And so this different learning strategy will likely lead to different representation of what they're learning and use of these buttons. And we want to know what happens and how it happens. And there are humongous individual differences. You cannot read the details here, but basically these are 3 different dogs where one loves to talk about locations, basically the places she wants to go to. The other one likes to talk about poop. And the other one likes to talk about treats and food. And again, it's like you can see how often they press certain words on each day, and you see the different amount of button pressing per day, right? Some day you press it a lot, some day you press it very little. These are not machines. We don't do 10-hour trainings a day. I don't do any training. This is like they choose when to interact, how to use it. And for some of them, sometimes you have chatty days. Sometimes you don't need the buttons and your life goes to completely fine. And none of them presses the buttons more than like 100, 200 times. It's not like, oh, we press the button 1,000,000 times a day. They're not teenagers playing video games, okay? So this is not the kind of situation. And of course, we want to know, do they push it to relieve stress and so on. This is my last slide. So the last slide is, New York Times put out an article saying what your dog wants. Dogs are really good at reading our emotions, but we're not so good at reading theirs. There's also papers that came out recently saying that we're not very good at it. And indeed, we also know that there are 350,000 ER visits a year in the US because of dog bites. So for a lot of people, they don't understand that the dog is not interested or not willing to be touched or interacted with. And the other thing I wanted to say is in 2009, Mike Tomasello and Yelena Kaminsky published an article in Science saying, like infant, like dog. So a dog has the intelligence of a 9-month-old. And I think now we have more work suggesting that this might be not quite correct. And I think what I'm hoping is some of the work we're doing is suggesting that at the very least, what they seem to be doing is more comparable to what a toddler can do, like a 2 or even potentially a 3-year-old can do. When usually they start combining 2 words around 18 months, 20 months, children, human children. These dogs can do more of that. And so again, you want to know, what does it tell us about their intelligence that maybe we didn't know? And what if you train them for many years? How far can they go, right? So what else can they talk about? And what if you introduce other concepts we didn't know? And I know this was super long, but I hope it was informative. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation, Federico. I'm sure, yeah, we already got lots of questions lined up, so dive right into it. I don't know who was first, but Joanne, maybe we'll start with you and Carolina.
This was amazing. Thank you so much. I've been following your work, and it has been incredible to be able to hear you speak so lengthy about it. So thank you. At first, I just wanted to say you don't have to apologize for a 3-year-old. I've been holding a baby this whole talk, breastfeeding, doing all the things, and it was wonderful. I was able to engage. So thank you for being vulnerable and showing us the possibilities of doing what you're doing. But my question is related more on the linguistic side. My area of study is communication, and I was wondering if some people with the boards put multiple languages. So
yes.
Are there, yes, okay. So then how are you noting changes with dogs using multiple languages and thinking about the concept potentially of code switching when dogs are communicating with their guardians?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. So as you can imagine, this is just the surface of all that is happening out there. So there are some households where there's owners that speak different languages, and so you might have some buttons are in English, some buttons are in Mandarin Chinese, and those may be concepts that you might be using in interaction with different humans. We have not looked into it, to be honest. This is something I would love to look more into. We also have an interesting question of while we ask people to fill out a form in English, they can train in whichever language they want. So we have a lot of people like in Japan or in China or in Germany or the Netherlands. And so it becomes very interesting to think, if you speak a different language, we are looking at concepts coming together, and kind of like this is the food word, and that's sort of how you look at it. But once you look at the individual, there might be some interesting phenomena you can sort of detect about how they go about communicating, for example, ordering right sentences. But I think this code switching and bilingualism and so on, it's a fascinating question. And I would definitely love to do more on this. So let's keep in touch.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Han, you want to go ahead?
So in terms of the clever Hans effect, as you know, dogs are remarkably good at detecting gestures by people, the direction of gaze, or changes in expression. Have you tried any experiments where people were not visible and they just interacted with the dogs through acoustic means, but there were no people around for the dogs to be able to see for any of those micro gestures?
Yeah, so that's a great question. That is indeed a concern, and that's one of the reasons why I want to have more cameras in general, just to see, is the human signaling first. Like you have seen some videos where the dog was looking elsewhere when compared to where the human was. So at least the initiation seems to be unrelated to what the human was doing. One of the experiments I showed, the idea was there's an experimenter that goes into the room, covers some of the buttons, and then leaves the room. And then another experimenter who doesn't know which buttons these are comes in, has headphones on with music going on, and is instructed to push the buttons and like the red button, and then stand still and look straight. And then you see what the dog does. And then we see with these dogs, if the owner now says the word, what do they do? And the behaviors appear to be the same, which at least for the experimenter being in the room and not, because they stand up and just look straight and they don't know what they pushed, they can't tell you you need to go to the door, or you need to go retrieve the food, or you need to go do this other thing. It's not a perfect answer to your question. It's sort of one attempt as trying to rule out that, at least for concepts like outside food play, that's their main way of making sense of it. We know, of course, from other studies that they can understand words and respond to words. I mean, there are indeed some very gifted dogs that can do that. The example that you saw there with the last one, where you saw the dog pushing help, look, the human was clearly directed against the wall, so was not giving a signal like those are the buttons you need to push. And you saw, I mean, this was an unedited clip, right? It's like this is sort of what the dog was doing. So in that sense, I think we have evidence along the way, but I would love to discuss studies that, in your opinion, would help making sure that this is not, one of the main thing happening here. So I think clever answers I put earlier on, it is a concern. It's a general concern. And the last thing, and I'm not saying every dog understands exactly what is going on and doesn't use other cues. Many of them do use the cues, just like some of them are completely random. But there are some that are not. And I think that's an important consideration.
Okay, thank you.
Carolina.
So thank you for your talk. That was very enlightening. And I don't feel crazy anymore for liking that stuff. And
Thanks.
I thought it was very interesting you said about well, the culture of the home influences how the pet uses the language, right? And I just wanted to point out and ask, because I kind of asked this question in neuroscience in college, and my teacher kind of said that I was crazy for that.
Oh.
But I think it's what is the difference from a dog learning to ask for help on a button and communicate what it needs to, and humans training a new language on Duolingo? Because it's like you're training on buttons all day, and I don't really see a difference on dogs training on buttons. And it's a new language for them as well, and I think it's the same. For me, it's the same. I don't see the difference.
So let me. This is an interesting point. It actually gives me an opportunity to mention something that I should have said in the talk. As when we compare this to our children learn language, there's a very key difference, which is a child. So the dog can only use the buttons that the owner gives them, right? So they cannot choose which other buttons to use. They can try to combine them, but whatever vocabulary they have is what the owner decides is the vocabulary they want the dog to have, which is potentially a problem because, of course, a child can decide to actually say mom and dad, even though they might not hear it as often as they hear milk, because for them it's more meaningful, right? So on the other end, of course, the learning, this associative learning in many ways is what a young child does too, right? It's like when they start producing words, etc. It's like they hear it, they reproduce it, they try to kind of see the effect it might have. But in general, they just like associate this button with a certain meaning. And I think there is no doubt that a lot of this learning in terms of mechanisms is very basic mechanism that a pigeon can do, right? There's no reason why a pigeon could not be able to do this, at least the basics. The question is, once you start having, you know, a few of these concepts, what do you do? And that's the part that is more exciting to me because, you know, we know that children at some point, once they start having around 40, 50 words, they start combining them into 2-word sentences and possibly more longer sentences. And if that's the case, then at what point do you start seeing these dogs spontaneously combining some of this concept? That's why we want to know what the training is versus what is the spontaneous use of some of this concept, and see, can you now say more than you used to say? And that's why productivity, to me, is such an exciting challenge. I don't know if they can do it. I have anecdotal reports that they can do it. There's several animals before dogs that have been claimed to have productivity, several primates, but it was mostly anecdotal. So we need to run experiments and trying to figure out, can we actually, even if it's just a couple of them, but they can do it systematically, well, that would be very interesting, right? So that's sort of where I'm at, is like, I'm not trying to say this is it. I'm just trying to say there's a lot of open questions, and hopefully, you know, what is clear is that we're trying to figure this out without saying they're talking, but they're communicating. And I think it's pretty obvious that they are using it to ask for things and to ask what they want.
Thank you. That's really cool. Thank you.
Sharon, you want to talk on this one?
Thank you very much for the lecture, Percy. It was a really valuable experience for me. I would like to ask about something. If a dog or a primate or an animal was trained to use the buttons, and if they could use it effectively, would they try to communicate using those buttons with other animals, or especially their children?
It is a very good question. So this is why we're trying now to collect some of this data about, you have a second dog coming into the household. One is already an experienced dog. Do you see any teaching? Do you see anything like, or do you see them ever using? The reality is the answer should be no, right? It's like a dog doesn't need a button to communicate to another dog. But if it's a dog and a cat, and now you're not fully sharing a vocabulary or communicative vocabulary, is it possible that you might sometimes use buttons to convey what you want? We have seen instances of that. Again, mostly I would say right now is an anecdotal report. I know that there are fantastic events that some of the participants organize where somebody invites a bunch of dogs with buttons and they lay out those buttons, and then they interact with the humans and interact with each other. And I wish I could put some cameras in there and see what's happening, because it must be incredibly exciting. And at the same time, it could be very messy, right? So, but I do think my idea here is not, hey, the buttons are going to replace your spontaneous vocabulary. The idea is that for interacting with humans, it can be sometimes helpful. And so it's not like, it's kind of like learning a second language, right? It's like, I'm Italian, and when I'm in Italy, I don't speak English. But when I come here, it might be handy to be able to use English to communicate with you. So do I speak in Italian or in English to my kids? Well, you could hear me say something in English so that you would hear, but I speak Italian, right? It's like, so some of this is an interesting question of like, you know, under which condition would you see them trying to use buttons with their puppies if they have some, or would they actually do it with some other animals that are in the household? I can tell you a couple of funny anecdotes I've seen. I've seen them doing something that's been reported before, which is there would be like a dog on the couch and a human, and another dog that might possibly want to go on the couch. And so the other dog that's not on the couch goes to the soundboard and pushes play, play. And so the dog on the couch jumps out to run towards the toy basket, and the one that had just pushed play just runs to the couch and sits on it and has zero intention to play. Now, is this a scientific study? No. But have I seen clips of this? Yes. So again, part of it is, could they use it in a manipulative way? My kids can certainly use language in a manipulative way. at age 3. So, you know, maybe some dogs can do that too. Again, I wouldn't put a paper out on this, but I think it can be an interesting challenge to figure out, you know, can they use it to communicate, not just to the dog, but also to the human as a way to sort of say what might be going on.
Thank you very much. I will be following your work.
Thanks.
Claudia, go ahead.
Hello, thank
Hi.
you. Hi. Thank you. It was a really nice talk. I was particularly fascinated, of course, by the outliers, and it seems to open up some nice possibilities. But about the general population, so like the majority of the dogs and the majority of the buttons pressed, not so surprisingly, they are requests for something. And you've been emphasizing the communicative aspect of the whole interaction. But then if you consider that, you know, if my dog wants to go out, she might go and whine and bark and try to go out, and that could be a behavior that often leads to me opening the door and letting her out. So this could be seen like an operant behavior to obtain a specific reward. And then there's, you know, owners or trainers that could train a dog to ring a bell to go out, and that again could be seen as an operant behavior to obtain that specific reward, and so on for food and everything else. Pretty much like Sophia, the little dog that learned to use a keyboard to make requests. But in a way, I think it would be nice if we could disentangle the two possibilities, and maybe there's a combination of both. So maybe these are operant behaviors, but there's also a communicative intention or context. And I was wondering if you plan to do so, and how. Partly maybe you answer, because then maybe if dogs could combine things in a novel way, but that I assume this is going to be just the very smart, the gifted ones or the outliers. But how do you plan to address this?
Thank you for the question. It's a great question. And when I give interviews, I always mention it, but somehow it doesn't quite get captured by the journalist. I'm very concerned about the vending machine effect, right? It's like the idea that you've learned this sequence, you push it, and we know that was true for primates too. But like you just push the sequence, it works. You get what you want. You have zero representation or care about what the recipient is doing, right? That's why it is very important for me to imagine, you know, what else are you going to do to try to get the same thing. So for example, think about the dog that you saw that wanted to go outside, and it says potty, no. Let's go to the park, no. Come outside, yes, let's do this. Now, that was not an experiment, that was just like anecdotal, right? But it's like one of the ideas could be, if you look at situations in which they don't get what they want, do they try to find other ways to try and get at it? And so that would be what humans do when they're trying to persist, right? It's like you try to find a way to ask for it in a differently. And I hope we can agree that your dog asking to go outside is trying to communicate with you. Otherwise, they don't need to bark or whine. It's communication. I think we can agree on that.
That's why I'm saying it's nice, right? Because
Yeah.
you know, it can be seen that way, because the associative learning fans will say, no, that's just associative learning. Whereas maybe those that tend to give more complex cognitive explanations to everything, that I would say is communicative.
Right.
But maybe this is when, you know, we could finally find a way to see what's happening
separate it. Yes,
with the buttons,
exactly.
or with the barking behavior, ringing the bell, or whatever.
Absolutely, because as you're saying, is like the productivity studies, and that's what we're trying to do. If you could combine things in a way that you have never been experiencing before, to ask for something that is novel, strange, unusual, clearly that was not trained, right? So that needs to be some way that you're trying to figure out right now to tell me something, and if that happens, and even if it happens with just one dog, it's still interesting, right? It's like, it would be like, it's possible. But I would love to talk more about what kind of evidence would potentially convince you and others, because I mean, as I hope it's clear, is like, I am not, you know, I'm really trying to figure out what's going on and trying to disentangle as much as I can with the limited resources that we have, and hoping that at some point it's a bit of like, not everyone, not equally. Just, I loved your gifted dog challenge, because it was perfectly matching what we were seeing, which is like, some dogs use a lot of buttons, most of them do not. Some dogs can learn right away, many of them do not. So, you know, there's variation, and that variation I think is interesting. It's not a waste of time to find the outliers. I think the outliers are indeed, you know, what can help us see what might be possible, and then figure out, can we find patterns across the outliers, which I know you guys have been trying to do as well, right? It's like, what is common about among the gifted dogs, and how hard it is to find. If you have 6 or 7, it's hard. If you maybe have 100 that can show similar skills,
I
maybe
wish.
you find a lot of more similarities is possible. But still, you're absolutely right. We need to kind of find a way to address it's purely associative learning, and there's nothing communicative about what they're doing, and trying to convey that there is some kind of representation of the recipient, at least that's what I'm coming from, and finding the evidence would be an exciting challenge.
Mhm. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you. Have any of the pet owners used actual dog sounds like barks, whimpers, whines, moans, growls, snarls for the buttons to, you know, so to speak in their language, and then see how they combine those sounds with human word counterparts that they don't have sounds for? And then the second question was, sorry.
No, go ahead. I can answer that later. Yeah, go ahead.
The second question was, are there any studies or observations you've made on how the buttons are laid out in relation to one another? If they're done in an organized way, does that have an impact on how fast the pet learns? And I'm just thinking of like semantic domains where synonyms are closer to one another and antonyms are more distant. Thank you.
So the answer to, fantastic question. The answer to the first question is, I believe some of them are trying. I don't think anybody is looking at how they combine them, but they might have some of it. Usually, you know, the kind of things that we get is information about what words they put into it, and some of them might put like woof woof or something. But what is exactly recorded on it, we don't know, and that's one of the challenges, right? So we have like what they tell us they put on, unless we have a camera on, and then we can hear it. One of the things that I'm really interested in is the fact that some people record their words in the equivalent of motherese. It's kind of like with high pitch and so on, and others just like me would be like outside, food. Yeah. And of course, the idea would be that probably this way would not help learning quite as much as if you record it in a way that is more attention catching for the dog. And again, you know, this is sort of another challenge. It's like, I wish, and we can make it, we can just ask people to send us the recordings and the audio, but it's just one of those things where, like, you know, it's a fascinating question. Like, what if you actually had signals that are common to them? Would they then use it? And if they do it, maybe that might be much easier than using words that, you know, might have other representation. Sorry, can you remind me the second question you had?
It was more just laying out
the layout. Yeah. So in the beginning, we were actually, and we are now back at keeping track of sort of how they use the soundboard. So some of them use this kind of, the tiles that also From a Pet uses, where you can, the idea is that if you cluster them, for example, like these are name of humans, these are locations, these are activities, these are types of food, and you have them all on the same tile, it might facilitate in the beginning remembering, like, you know, I'm looking for food, so I don't need to think about the 100 buttons, I just need to remember it's on this tile. So it's like one of these 4 or 5. So the idea is that should potentially help. We have now looked systematically, as I said, at learning. We're now looking more into it. Part of the challenge is that while with the training study, we can look at that more systematically, people get into the study at whatever stage they are. Some people have not even bought buttons. Others have already been training for 6 months. So once they come in, we don't necessarily have this, we don't know all the training, all the, you know, all that has gone into it. But I think it's a very, very important question, and we're definitely looking into it. Thank you so much for the ideas.
Thank you, Jeff. Treasure.
Yes, I just had a quick question. Regarding the tiles, if dogs are colorblind, are the colorful tiles more for the owner, and do they respond better to the wavy patterns as opposed to the colors? I noticed some tiles are monochromatic, but they have a patterning. And which ones do you think would work better?
So there is, as you could tell, a huge variation in terms of buttons, and if some of them have images on top of them, some owners write the words on top of it for themselves to remember which button is which. Um, I think it's mainly for the owners. I don't think that the dog is necessarily remembering the color as much, though the tiles and the position definitely is something that they have good memory of. So it seems pretty clear that they have a sense of like, this button has to be over here. And what we know is that when they push the button, if the button doesn't produce the vocalization that they used to produce, or if you change the word, it kind of messes them up and it takes them a while to figure out what's going on. So sometimes some people are like, I'm not going to buy a new button. You never use this. Let me just record a different one. And all of a sudden it's like, whoa, 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 what's this? And so in that sense, it becomes, as you can imagine, what happens in people's home is not under my control. So it's a little bit of like, okay, let's look into this. So this is something we want to investigate. I would say they can definitely detect some contour and shapes and drawings. You're right, colors is a problem. So I wouldn't think that the color of the buttons is relevant for the dogs really, or not as much. It's more for the humans to remember what is what, if they don't add other signals to it. But yeah, that's a great point.
Diana.
Yeah, thanks for a terrific talk, Federico. I had a similar question and another one about whether you thought it seems like it was probably the position of the button then is what you're saying. I was wondering too about color and how much they could attend, which again, that's really interesting that dogs are so good at remembering relative positions. And when you look at some of these really large arrays, that's a whole other study. How good are they?
Absolutely. And it's not only it's a whole other study, it's like it kind of creates a practical limitation, right? Which is like how many buttons can you have in anybody's home, right? It's like you can't have 1,000 buttons unless you spread it all over the house. So it's kind of like, how far can this go beyond this becoming a memory challenge, not a communicative challenge? It's not that you cannot ask for it, just you can't remember which one is which, right? And I think in that sense, it's what are the ways that work? What are the strategies that work best? So what is common kind of across the most proficient users and the training that goes into it? So the repositioning of something like that. Like you might have seen some dogs, for example, Bunny, it's almost like you enter in a console and you have like the most common buttons are kind of around you, so they're easier to touch, but you can easily see them walking around and going to touch a button that is on the other side, which clearly tells you that they know that that's what they need and they just relocate and touch a button far away. And I hope some of the scripts show that they're not just like spamming it all the time. It's like there seem to be quite deliberate choice of which buttons to use. Not every dog, not all the time, but at least for some of them, it seems to be pretty consistent.
Yeah. Thank you. I was going to mention something in answer to your question about productivity and how ideas about that, when we think about the other animal language studies and my own work with dolphins using cues, one of the things I think is really helpful, and I'll use two examples. I'll use an example from Irene Pepperberg's work with Alex, the African gray parrot, where he had words for rock and corn, and she kept pretty copious notes. When he had a favorite kind of soft corn, yellow corn she would feed him, and at one point they ran out of the yellow corn. He was requesting corn and they didn't have any more, and all she had was Indian corn, which is obviously quite hard. And he said, when he bit into it, she offered it to him, and after biting into it, he said rock corn. And that where he hadn't used that before. And she would keep notes of these kinds of things. I think what's critical, if we can get people to understand, please keep strong records of how you're teaching it. What are the things you're using in combination? Because that's critical. When you were talking about, I think it was bone and water for ice.
Bone water,
Had
yes.
anybody use that? How did they use that? Was it ever used? Because if they're if they're doing what they already heard, that's one thing, and it's important. That's interesting in itself. But if it's not trained and they're using it, our dolphins at one point had signals for ring that gave them a ring and ball, and we couldn't respond. It was just they would use the keys and then they would get objects. We recorded everything on video and audio and then looked. And they started combining them. And we didn't even know when they were combining them till after we did the analysis. They had combined ring and ball when they had started creating a new toy of playing with them together. So these kinds of things really give us insights, perhaps about their perception. And I think that again, it gets into can we, and it's hard. We all know this. Can we be very careful at keeping really good data on that? And when we're working with citizen science, I know we're calling it community science now as well, maybe getting people more aware of the importance of that. And again, I think we all appreciate how hard these studies are to do. But thank you so much. I just wanted to.
I really appreciate it, and I just want to kind of repeat exactly what you said, which is like the more you can tell us about the training, the more you can tell us about this is something I didn't know what it meant. It was just doing it, and this was the context. You know, it's helpful to figure out what could we use and how can we create such situations, right? It's like if ice is something that you don't have a button for, but is exciting for you, maybe that's a concept we could try for a little study and see, you know, out of 50 dogs, maybe a couple of them will start asking for it in some way. We might not get an ambulance to go there, but there might be a sound of an ambulance. It might be something. There might be things that are like highly arousing, attractive, interesting. And maybe you find ways to see that some of them seem to be trying to communicate about these things. And if they do, how do they do it? And if they do it in a way that might make sense, then what does it tell us about the representation of the recipient, right? Of what the human might actually use, right?
Yeah,
Because
and
to me, it's like squeaker car is like, it might be complete random, but squeaker car is like, yeah, when you think of an ambulance, when I ask my 3-year-old, it's like, it's a car that makes a very loud noise. You know, that's what an ambulance is for you. You don't know what what happens inside, but it's a loud noise car, and it makes sense.
Yeah. I just wanted to make one quick comment too, though. I just think these kinds of studies are so important because they do give other species a sense of agency. And that's, you know, that in itself, from a welfare point of view, I think is critical. So I just wanted to mention that, and I'll stop talking so other people have a chance. Thank
you, Diana. Francine.
Thank you. Thanks for such a wonderful presentation. It was really fascinating. I wanted to ask, have you thought of or have you started to try this with working dogs? Specifically, you mentioned that you were doing olfactory work with the police dogs, but it would be really fascinating to look at, say, sheep dogs and both, say, in Scotland, Wales, or I don't know, must use them in the United States, but also with indigenous populations. I was thinking of the Wayway in particular. The Wayway have their dogs sleep with them in the house. They put them on shelves. They treat them as other human beings, and yet they're part of their sort of hunting technique to be able to facilitate that. And it would be really fascinating to look at that cross-culturally, but also just how do those dogs communicate differently since they're already so highly trained in communication? Anyway, thanks, Al.
This is a fantastic question, and the answer is we have some dogs in the study that are working dogs, and we know that they are highly trained, and indeed usually they're much better and quicker at learning than others. My personal dream, and that's why, you know, first I'm doing the more traditional work with detection dogs, is, you know, could you imagine what it would tell you if a dog could tell you they detect some substance in the environment that might be tied to an explosives, and it can tell you, this is what I smelled and where I smelled it. You know, instead of having to send a person in and trying to figure it out, even having to get the dog all the way in and trying to sort of get, like many dogs die because of fentanyl, because they put their nose into it and then they die. And if you could just be like, this is what I'm smelling, and I'm like, okay, nobody needs to go in here. You can smell something from a distance. That's enough. We're going to just go check it out. So there's a lot of things that could happen in terms of safety for the animals and for the humans if we could just help them say, these are the 3-4 things I smelled. And, you know, that's just so you know, it's in here. And the other thing for me that I'm also very much interested in, you were talking about working dog, but also companion dogs, right? It's like, you know, you can imagine that I didn't show some of these videos, but like if you could have a dog that can kind of ask for things for you because they understand what you need, you know, that could be huge. You know, even if it's as simple as, you know, you need to go to a bathroom and they can just say, you know, this is, you know, this is what the human needs, you know, and or, you know, the human is hungry and they want some food or they need something else that you're struggling, but they can kind of read from your behavior what you need. If they could communicate it to somebody who's not capable of understanding the human equally, that would be very beneficial. And the last environment, by the way, that I wanted to mention is sheltered dogs. So one of the things that people tell me is that the training makes them feel more bonded with their pet. And I think it's true of any training, right? It's like the more time you spend trying to teach something, the more time you spend doing something together, and that can create some bonding. And of course, if you feel that you understand them a little bit better and you can provide for them, that is also beneficial. But the other thing is like a lot of shelter dogs get returned to the shelter because, you know, they come home and make a mess and you don't understand what they're asking you to do, and they pee in the house and they destroy your door and they do whatever thing. And that's why, you know, we were talking with Leo about this. It's like, imagine if some of these dogs could just tell you when they need to pee, when they're hungry, when they're thirsty, when they want to play. And maybe just having 4 buttons could just help a new owner just be like, okay, I hear you. Instead of peeing on the carpet, how about I take you out? Or you're hungry. That's what's going on. I mean, when my son screams, most of the times, he is hungry. And that's like, I get it, and I hear you, and I can help you. And I think, you know, that idea of like, you know, we're not trying to make these dogs different from what they are. We're trying to help them get some more agency, getting the human to maybe be a little more responsive. And again, it's like, you know, if you feel you're good, you don't need to do any of this training. It's more like if you think that could help you, why not? You know, so that's all I'm trying to say. I'm trying to understand how they do it. And then I'm not saying do it or don't do it. I'm just trying to sort of figure the system out.
That's great. Thank you.
I have a final, I guess, and maybe naive question, but I think you've worked on primate gestural communication with Kirsty Graham, who's an animal behavior and primate communication researcher. They've also been a guest speaker with this series earlier this year. And recently you published work on the origins of great ape gestural forms. And I'm curious, to what extent do you see that area of research overlapping with or informing the work that you do in this context with domestic animals and soundboards? As a non-specialist, they seem sort of distant intuitively. Gestural communication, obviously embodied signaling and augmented interspecies communication devices have you seem, you know, much more abstract or arbitrary and disembodied, maybe decontextualized in important ways. But I'm just curious if you could speak to any of those connections.
Right. It's a great question. So a lot of people are like, wait, but weren't you working on gestures in primates? What went wrong with you? Why are you doing this? And I'm like, no, to me, you know, I'm interested in communication and how we learn it, right? So what I was really interested in was how primates learn to communicate. And for example, you look at their vocalizations, and they're much less flexible in terms of how they acquire them and how they use them. But their gestures, they're very flexible in their use. And so they can decide, you know, which signal to use. And it is kind of calibrated on who the recipient is. And so if you're interested in learning how they learn this gesture, often they learn it through repeated interactions with others. And you can make sense of like, oh, this animal is probably trying to tell me this. I can understand that because, hey, as a member of the same species, I would do it this way. So when you say squeaker car, it's like, how would I represent this thing? Oh, maybe the other animal, the other human, the other creature can also represent things the same way. This is what we have in common. There is no doubt that the buttons in many ways remove, you know, a lot of the other information. But when you look at how these interactions happen, they happen with bodies and in environments where there is barking and there is the dog wagging their tail and there is the door that you can scratch and there is all this other stuff. It's just that, You know, a lot of people just look at the buttons per se and think, hey, it would be like looking at a phone conversation in humans. It's like, yes, we can do it. It doesn't mean that that's where it starts. You know, it's like children don't learn to talk on the phone. They learn from being exposed to others and so on. And so to me, is like, the dream is really if we could have more videos, if we could have more you know, fine-grained observations of the whole learning process and how they use it, and if you can track them over time. Imagine we stop studying human language at age 2. What would we know about how people talk if this was a different species, right? It's like, well, there's a lot else you can do. It's just that you stop too early before there was more that could happen. And of course, the logistics are like, you have these buttons, they have a certain shape, they have occupy a certain space. Can we come up with other devices? You know, is there anything else that you can do to help us see what they're thinking about? You know, what's going on through their mind and what are they kind of reacting to? One of my favorite thing is how many cats and dogs are complaining about noise that we have a hard time hearing. You know, I was telling you at the beginning, it's like, oh, the neighbor is producing this loud noise, blowing leaves. Well, a lot of this cats and dogs complain about noise. It's too loud. It's construction. It's you know, it's something else. Heat. It's too hot outside. For us, it might not mean much, but for them, it's actually a problem. And so, even just appreciating it, just because we don't realize this is a problem, if they have any other way to convey what is going through them, you know, for a chimp, it might be banging hard and running at you and trying to sort of get you to kind of respond to something. But they display emotions and attitudes and what they're experiencing. And I think the question is, again, how do you learn it? How far can you learn it? What are your representations of what you have? And can it scale up, or is just the equivalent of a translator device, but it doesn't really tell us anything about what else is going on through their mind? If you take it as an experimentalist, you're like, well, when a dog can say yes and no and can possibly answer some questions, that would be amazing. Some of these dogs have something that is the beginning of a Likert scale. They do like, big like, no like. And to me, again, you know, it's like when you think about what we do with humans in social sciences, it's like, well, those are ways in which we gather some knowledge from people, right? It's like, if they can tell you, you know, on a scale, like how they feel about things, that could be helpful. So what I'm saying is, there's a lot of possibilities, and unfortunately, resources, time, manpower is what it is. But I hope that this is a way of showing that we're trying, we are being skeptical, but we're constructive, and we try to let the data speak at us and see what there is, and hope that others will feel maybe less inclined to this as a useless enterprise and more like trying to understand, is there anything possibly useful from this? And if you want to help, please write me. We need a lot of help. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. You know, I think all the time that we have today. But yeah, I'd like to thank everyone in attendance, and of course, Dr. Rossano for the wonderful talk. And if you'd like to learn more about Rossano's work, the UCSD Comparative Cognition Lab, maybe get involved in some way, just check out the links here. I'm going to post in the chat where you can get in touch with Dr. Rossano. So yeah, as we wrap up, I wanted to say thanks to the Interspecies Internet community for your engagement and interest in our monthly Interspecies Conversations lecture series. If you'd like to learn more about our organization or stay up to date with our lecture schedule and other events, projects, and activities, or connect with a community of researchers and enthusiasts, then please follow us on social media. Visit our YouTube channel, join our Slack, and subscribe to our newsletter. Our assistant Carolina will share these links with you in the chat. So yeah, again, on behalf of Interspecies Internet, the trustees in our community, thank you so much, Federico, once more for bringing us a fascinating look at, you know, these really data-intensive global longitudinal studies and the promise they might hold for studying animal communication and cognition. And thanks again to our audience for joining us. We hope to see everyone again next month for another interspecies conversation event and more stimulating discussion. Thank you again, everyone, and have a great weekend.
Thank
Bye.
you, everybody. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for staying so long. I really, really appreciate it. Have a wonderful weekend.